Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is Jackson. Really glad to have you with me today, and talking about something that we don't always talk about on this podcast series, which is the numbers, the statistics. From time to time, I try to do episodes of the podcast where I answer questions that I'm getting typically from students or people that are thinking about taking the bar exam. And one of the more common questions that I've gotten over the past few months has been, is the exam getting harder? What do the pass rates look like? Is it possible even to pass the bar? And I thought today in this episode, what we'd do would be to take a deeper look at the statistics that come from the official sources themselves, the bar examiners, the National Conference of Bar Examiners, and the state bar exams, and to look at the results from all of 2015, which is the last formally recorded and produced results around the country, and we'll link to the source of that, but it's from the National Conference of Bar Examiners in their publication called The Bar Examiner, and then to look at the February 2016 results, which have not yet been formally compiled and produced, but which obviously we can go to each individual state that we're interested in, talk about that, and we don't have quite as much data, but we've got enough to give you the general overview of what's going on. And my goal is to just give you some information to help you get a better sense in this environment of what the bar exam looks like, what's happening, what's working, what's not working, what jurisdictions maybe you should be considering, which ones maybe you should be trying to run away. As we say here in the Disney neighborhood, run, Simba, run. So there are some of those kinds of jurisdictions, to be sure. Now, before I jump into the meat of today's episode, I do want to invite those of you that are looking at taking the bar exam in the upcoming year, in 2017. Wow, that's weird, isn't it? In 2017, I want to invite you to join me for a masterclass called How to Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. This is a 90-minute free session that we do online. And you can register. You do need to register, in fact, even though it's free. And you can do that by going to celebrationbarreview.com. And on that front page, you'll see two buttons there. One for our live masterclass on Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern. That would be 12 noon Pacific time. And there's also a button right underneath that. If you'd like to if you can't wait, we have a video presentation that you can watch immediately. It's the same material, same presentation, same opportunity for you to get the same information and bonuses and so on. And you can click on either one of those and get yourself registered and join us for this masterclass. We've had several thousand people go through it with great results and feedback, and I encourage you, by all means, whether you're taking our course or not, or even if you're just thinking about taking the bar or thinking about taking our course, be sure to join us for that course. We're going to look at the 4 steps that passing bar takers have to follow in order to get those passing results. And I think it's material that you're not going to want to lose out on or miss out knowing. So I hope you'll join us Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, or on demand. So it's a cool way to get all that information. Well, let's go ahead and jump right into today's episode and into this deeper dive on the statistics. And I want to start by saying that I'm not a statistical whiz or a major by any means, but over the past 25 years, as I've prepared students to take their bar exams, I've gotten pretty good at being able to analyze and look at these numbers and certainly to see the trends in the numbers. And if I had to give you an overall picture, the trend is that for the last 10 years, things have gotten worse and worse and worse. They've continued to get lower in 2015. In February 2016, they went down again. As I'm recording this, we don't yet have any 2016 July results. We'll talk about those obviously when they come out, but I would say that for right now, the expectation probably is that nationally those numbers will go down. Now, I'm going to focus on a handful of states where we do most of our work, and those states would be California, Florida, Georgia, New Jersey up until this year, because it's now switching to the Uniform Bar Exam in 2017. New York, which was its own separate test until July of 2016, and then joined the UBE, and then Texas. So those are the jurisdictions that I'm primarily interested in. And one of the things that makes it difficult with the UBE is that while it's a uniform test, it is graded, scored, and the results come out in individual jurisdictions. So it's very difficult to talk about it as a unified whole, but I'll make a few observations to you. So let's start off by looking first at the 10-year summary of bar pass rates. I think that's a good place to start. If we go from 2006 to 2015, what's happened in the pass rates generally? And the answer is that in virtually every jurisdiction, certainly all the ones that I just named for you, the pass rates have declined. In some cases, pretty significantly. Now, I'm going to throw a lot of numbers out at you in today's session, and obviously you may want to be paying more attention when I talk about your state, but I don't really want you to get fixated on specific numbers so much as the trend lines or the general information. So in some cases, I may jump over certain details. But here's, for example, what's happened in California. 10-year trend, overall pass rates. So we're talking about first-time and repeat bar takers. That rate has gone, 10 years ago, it was a 47% pass rate, which was very low, the lowest in the country, I think. As of 2015, that overall pass rate was 44%, so it's gone down. Florida had gone from 64% to 59%. Wait till you hear the numbers for February 2016. They've cut almost in half from there. Georgia, the overall rate went from 76%, a pretty good pass rate, down to 62%, so a much tougher test there. New Jersey went from 73% 10 years ago to 65%. And New York went from 63% 10 years ago to 56%. In Texas, 10 years ago, the pass rate overall was 74%, and in 2015, it was 65%. So in every one of those jurisdictions, the overall numbers went down. Now, the national average across all 50 states and a couple of jurisdictions, the overall pass rate 10 years ago was 67%, and it dropped to 59%. Now, you might ask, why am I talking about overall rates rather than first-time and repeaters? Well, couple of comments here. First of all, the first-time bar taker pass rate is always, and I expect always will be, higher than the overall rate. But more and more, as people are failing the bar and coming back and taking it over and over again, we're seeing that the overall rates are dropping dramatically. And so I think the overall rate, in some ways, is a more accurate reflection of what's going on in these jurisdictions and across the country. But let me just give you the averages over a 10-year period for the first-time bar takers across the country. 10 years ago, the first-time bar taker pass rate was 78% in the United States. In 2015, that rate was 70%. And you might say, well, 8%, what does that mean? Well, it's pretty significant when you start looking at the numbers of people that are taking the bar exam. We're looking at literally in most years something like 77,000 people taking the bar exam across the country. So 8% certainly makes a difference there. And if you're part of that 8%, it makes a huge difference. So no question in my mind, we're seeing bar pass rates drop, and we're seeing them drop across the board. None of the states that we're looking at had an increase in pass rates over that same 10-year period, either for first-time takers or overall rates. So that's the first thing I think you want to be clear on, is that the long-term trend line is going down. Now, what about overall pass rates in February 2016? Well, this is a little stunning, and again, we don't have the formal compiled numbers, so they're still subject to change. But I'm going to start with the most frightening number of all, which was Florida's overall pass rate. Florida's total number of bar takers versus people admitted to practice, passing the exam, was 27.7% in February. You heard that right, 27.7%. The first-time bar pass rate in February in Florida was only 58%. So what we've seen is, while the first-time rate continues to decline, that was from 68% the year before, down by 10%, the overall rate declined in half to 27.7. Pretty stunning. The overall pass rate in Georgia for February 2016 was 49.5%. In California, the overall rate was 35.7%, staggeringly low. New York's pass rate, for the last time that they gave their state exam, their overall pass rate was 41%. New Jersey's was 50%. And Texas was 56%. So in every one of those jurisdictions, the overall pass rate continued to decline from 2015 to February 2016. Now, when we don't get the repeat numbers in quite so early and clearly in these individual jurisdictions, but what I can tell you is that the first-time bar taker rates went down in every jurisdiction as well. As I said, Florida had a 58% pass rate in February. Georgia only had a 59%. California had a 45% first-time pass rate, so that means less than half of the first-time takers passed there. 55% passed in New York. New Jersey doesn't report a number for first-time takers, and Texas had a 65% pass rate. So of all of those jurisdictions, Texas turned out to be the most, successful or the easiest exam for first-time bar takers. Pretty interesting. Now, what about the multi-state itself? You hear a lot said about the multi-state and what the mean scores are and the distribution of scores. Well, again, the statistics tell us some interesting things. If we go over a 10-year period, it's kind of interesting and not in a good way. 10 years ago, the mean MBE score, so the average MBE across the country, was 141.5. In 2015, it was 138.7. It appears to have declined in February 2016 again. And when we look at the score distribution and we see the way that it continues to drop, in February exams, we're seeing a mean of 136, and in July exams, a mean of 139. So clearly, where we've got more repeat bar takers, which would be the February exams, the mean score is dropping really dramatically. And this continuing fall of scores, really from a high, if you go back to 2008, the mean score for the MBE was 143. So what we've seen in effect is a 5, almost 6-point drop in the MBE. Does that make a difference on pass rates? Sure, absolutely it does. And it's a significant drop, I think, in that regard. Okay, so those of you that are still with me that haven't yet slit your wrists or considering going into another field, good for you. Let's continue into our deeper dive and look at what's happening in some of these other jurisdictions and what the numbers look like there. Just to break out a little bit about July and February bar takers, in every jurisdiction that we look at, there are more July bar takers, and the pass rates are generally better in July. Now, the question that sometimes is asked is, does that mean the July test is easier? No, I think it does not in any jurisdiction. The reality is you have more graduating law school students in the July exams. They tend to be better performing than people who are repeating in February or are distant bar takers or perhaps people who have just been away for a while. That tends to be a bigger percentage of your February class. And so that's part of the reason that the numbers drop between February and July. But in all of these circumstances, we're looking at some really low numbers here. And I think it's important to keep in mind that these numbers don't seem to be getting any better, but in fact are low and pretty frightening, I think, for most people. Okay, well, how about the difference between first-time takers and repeaters in 2015? So we've got some trend lines. I gave you some scores from the 2015 exams, again, ranging from low numbers like 42% in jurisdictions like, or 44% in California. Actually lower than that in DC under the UBE, which I thought was interesting. It was 42%, but certainly one of the lowest in the country. And up to, I guess the high would have been Texas at a whopping 65%. All right, well, let's look at the first-time takers and the repeaters. And I want to break this out by state just a little bit and just show you. Now, we're looking at the two exams from 2015. When we go to California, one of the first things that we see is that first-time bar pass rate in California in 2015 was 57%, but the repeat bar pass rate was 27%. Wow, what a drop. 30% drop if you're a bar repeater. So if you're a repeater and you're thinking, hey, you know what, I'll just use those old books I've got and I'll just watch some YouTube videos and I'm not going to really put a lot of effort into it. Yeah, well, you can pretty much see what the results are for you. 27% overall. I can tell you there are a lot of people that just become chronic repeaters, and the more times you've taken and failed, the tougher obviously it is to get over the hurdle. So that's a pretty daunting number to me. But it's not the only low number. Georgia, much smaller state, first-time bar taker pass rate in Georgia is 73% in 2015, but the repeat bar taker rate is only 28%, so only 1% higher than in California. So again, the same pattern there. In Florida, very close, very similar numbers in 2015. There was a 68% first-time pass rate in 2015 in Florida, but only a 30% pass rate for repeat bar takers. So we see that same trend popping up over and over again. If we go to New Jersey, first-time pass rate, 71%. Repeat bar takers, that was reported there was 43%. So again, you're looking at this almost 30-point swing. In New York, and again, New York's numbers and New Jersey's numbers are going to change now because the nature of the test is changing. But in New York, for 2015, when they were giving their own exam, first-time bar takers had a 68% pass rate, but repeat bar takers only had a 29% pass rate. And then finally in Texas, the first-time bar taker rate was 71%, and the repeat passing bar rate was 44%. Now, when we go across the country, the national averages, there were about 55,000 bar takers, first-time bar takers in 2015. 70% of them passed. But here's an interesting number. There were almost a little over 22,000 repeat bar takers in the country, and only 33% of those passed. So, what's interesting to me is that the number of repeat bar takers is actually growing. That number is getting bigger and bigger, and the pass rate for that group is going down further and further. So nationally, a 33% pass rate if you're a repeat bar taker. And I think that that's just information that if you're a repeater, you got to know, you got to be aware of it. And as you've heard me say on this show and in other places, you got to go all in if you want to be successful if you're a repeat bar taker. I just don't think there's a way to back into passing the exam as a repeater. And I think that that is a hard thing to hear, hard thing to do, but really critical. Well, let me talk about a couple of other groups in terms of results in 2015 that often we distinguish. One is those individuals that are foreign-trained attorneys that went to law school outside the United States. Now, not every jurisdiction allows for people that are foreign-trained to take their bar exams, but I think it's interesting where we get those numbers and where they come to us. So in California, in 2015, the pass rate for foreign-trained attorneys, and this is all of them, this doesn't matter whether you're a first-time taker or a repeat bar taker, it was 18% pass rate. That's it. 200 people out of 1,100 passed the California bar who came from foreign jurisdictions. In Georgia, which is an interesting situation because Georgia has just unveiled a relatively new program in 2015 that allowed students with an LLM who were foreign trained but came to the U.S. and did an LLM to sit for the exam. Well, actually half of those people, 5 out of 10 passed. I'm glad to say a couple of those were our students. And in fact, the very first student to pass under that program was our student. Anna Sokol is her name, and we'll link to our interview with her where she talks about what she had to do to pass. But you can see, even though that's a high rate, it's a very small number of people, so still quite a challenge in Georgia. New York is another jurisdiction that allows foreign attorneys to take their exam. The New York pass rates were slightly better than the California rates. In fact, much better. It was 31% pass rate for foreign-trained attorneys in 2015. Now, I think that this is reflective of the fact that the New York exam, even as a state exam, was easier than California. I think as the UBE, it's even easier still. And I would expect to see more foreign attorneys sitting for, taking, and ultimately passing the New York bar in its uniform bar exam form. But 31% is nothing to brag about, but it's certainly better after you've heard the California scores. And then the third state that's really a major state for foreign-trained attorneys is Texas. There were 140 applicants in Texas. 30 of them passed. That's a 21% pass rate. Again, we were very pleased to have several of those students in our course, as we did in New York and California. But the reality is that it's a challenge for anyone. And so if you're a foreign trained attorney, a couple of comments for you. Number one, think very carefully before you decide if you want to take the exam in the U.S. The major jurisdictions, again, D.C. is a possibility. They've got a 29% pass rate. That's the UBE. So if that's, different scoring, but the same exam. So I would say to look at the UBE in New York or D.C. if you can sit for it. Then you've got Georgia, California, and Texas. Those are pretty much your choices. They're all challenging. They're all going to take a lot of time and effort, particularly if English is not your first language. And so you want to be really careful about and deliberate and I think intentional about studying and taking that exam. I would be very cautious of these companies that pop up in foreign countries and say they're going to teach you and prepare you for the New York exam or some other U.S. bar exam. Quite frankly, when you look at these numbers, I don't think many of them could generate enough students to be able to demonstrate real competence. And frankly, most of them haven't been around long enough to do that either. So be really careful before you jump into one of those kinds of courses. And then the last group that I want to single out are licensed attorneys. And in a couple of jurisdictions, they can sit for a shorter form exam. The two that we look at primarily are California and Georgia. In California in 2015, there were a total of 882 licensed attorneys sitting for the exam, and 360 of them passed. That was a 41% pass rate, which, really kind of mirrors, and in some ways is a little better, obviously, than the overall California rate. So that's good news, I think, in a sense. I guess the overall was 44 in California, 41 for attorneys. So pretty close, pretty much tracking that way. Where it's really interesting is the Georgia attorney exam. The pass rate in Georgia, 235 total takers that were attorneys, 194 passed, so that's an 83% rate, much, much better than the overall rate. Again, we had students sitting for both of those exams successfully. I would certainly say Georgia is an easier test for an attorney than California. The only downside is you got to practice law in Georgia. So no editorial comment there, but, go Saints. All right, so Georgia and California, if you're an attorney, two jurisdictions where you could sit for the exam, your chances are much better of passing in Georgia than in California, and better than the normal bar student in Georgia, a little bit worse than the normal bar student in California. The last group that I guess we should talk about just briefly would be those people that went to an ABA-approved law school for first-timers and repeaters. And the only thing I really want to say, because most jurisdictions don't allow non-ABA accredited school students to sit for their exam, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too deeply. I just want to say that in general, what we see is that if you went to an ABA school and you're a first-time taker, you're going to pretty much mirror the overall pass rate. If you're a repeater, you might do a little better in a jurisdiction like California, because frankly, you've got some people in California that went to non-accredited schools, non-ABA approved schools, or did law office study, and that's not a big number of people, but it's also a very low pass rate. In California, the non-ABA approved law school pass rate was only 16%, so just even below the foreign trained attorney rate. Very few people, only 3 people went through law office studies, so not a big group there. So you can see, for most people, it's a pretty clear demarcation. Well, what are the implications of those numbers? I mean, I've spent 20 minutes throwing out a ton of numbers at you, and if you're still with me and your eyes haven't glazed over, what does all of this mean? Well, I think there are a couple of takeaways that you can bring from this. Number one is you need to start your studies early. I think that if you're listening to this pretty much on our release date or thereabouts, that means you've got at least 6-7 months until a bar exam, maybe more. It is not too early to begin. In fact, you should begin now. In a course like ours, we invite you and encourage you to study 10 to 20 hours per week for an extended period of time. And some of you would say, well, I'm in law school. How do I do that? Well, you can do 10 to 20 hours a week of study if you're not sitting in a big box bar review. And we see consistently the people that start earlier do better than the people that start later. That's number one takeaway that I would have. Number two is you've got to be serious about this process. You've got to be all in. And by all in, I don't mean cramming for 6 weeks right before the bar exam. That isn't going to do it. I mean, statistically, you can see what happens. A couple of companies, Barbary and Kaplan in particular, prepare the vast majority of bar takers in the country, probably over 90%. That's a guess on my part. Well, if you extrapolate that 90% to the pass rates, they're not doing so well. Most of those people are really struggling to get through the exam. In some states, fewer than 50%, which means that that approach by itself is not a guarantee of success. And you shouldn't be misled into thinking, well, because everyone does it, it works. No, everyone does it because those companies spend an inordinate amount of money advertising and promoting themselves and ingratiating themselves in the law school world. It doesn't mean that that money is spent on the education or the resources or the results. And I think there's a distinction there, and you should be aware of that. If you want to take one of those courses, great, have at it. But I would do everything I could to make sure that you supplement that course with all of the resources you can. Start your studies early, get good assistance, get some personalized assistance, because these numbers simply don't indicate the kind of confidence that someone can finish law school, casually stroll in for 6 weeks of Barbary or Kaplan classes at their law school, and go and take the exam and pass. And that's certainly true when you look at the quality schools versus the second tier and the lower schools. In the states that produce results by school or identify them by school, this pattern is consistent and obvious. Florida is one of the most obvious in this. If you're not at one of the better law schools, your pass rates are not good. Now, some people are going to say, well, yes, but look at some of the schools in Florida. They had really good first-time taker bar rates. That's because of a game and a manipulation that goes on. We're going to talk about more about it in another episode. But let me just tell you what's going on. Some law schools are paying their recent graduates to not take the bar exam, sit out a test or more, and then sit for the exam. And by doing that, they're no longer considered first-time takers. Pretty clever, isn't it? Now, the amounts they're paying and how they're doing it are pretty sleazy in my view. But I just want you to be aware that this whole notion of first-time takers is being manipulated by some schools. Not all, not everywhere, but some schools are clearly manipulating this number by encouraging or paying students to sit out and not take the exam right after they graduate. So you want to be really careful about all of this, and I think you want to be an educated consumer about what you're looking for and what's going to work for you. Again, at the very start of today's episode, I invited you to join me for my webinar, my masterclass, about how to make the next bar exam your last bar exam. We're going to take a closer look at some of the qualities that you should be looking for, some of the things you should be looking for, and some of the mythology that you want to avoid about the bar exam that can cause you to be in that passing group or that would keep you out of the passing group, whether you're a first-time taker or a repeat bar taker. And I really encourage you to be careful and look at all of that information. Now, for 25 years, I've worked with people in all the jurisdictions we've been talking about today, and we've had great success. We've exceeded state pass rate averages across the board. But the reality is that working with a small number of people in selected states was really targeted work. And so those numbers are not necessarily indicative of the bigger numbers of what's going on in the bar. And the bigger numbers in the bar are pretty clear. It's getting harder. I think the test is harder. Most people would tell you the test is harder. Some people would tell you that the quality of the applicant pool has dropped. That hasn't really been my experience. I don't find my students today to be less talented, less capable, less experienced than they were 5 or 10 years ago. But I think that they're probably not as well prepared coming out of law school as they used to be, and I think that has an impact as well. So there's a lot of things to consider and look at. My final takeaway from all this is think about the jurisdiction you want to sit for. If you can sit for a uniform bar exam jurisdiction like New York, New Jersey, D.C., now South Carolina, Massachusetts in 2018. There's about 21, 22 jurisdictions currently, I think, in the UBE. Look into that. I think it's a good way to go. Now, your scores are not as transportable and as they would have you believe. You still have to get a passing score for the jurisdiction you're going to and meet the requirements of that jurisdiction. So don't think you're going to sit for the UBE in Hawaii and with your Hawaii passing score be waived into New York. It doesn't work like that. But if you're going to take the New York bar, It's better to be taking it right now as a UBE than it was under the old exam. At least that's my presumption. And where we see the UBE in other jurisdictions, generally smaller states, we're seeing generally better pass rates than in these specific states, big states like California, Florida, Texas, and so on. Should you be frightened of the Florida overall pass rate? Yes, absolutely you should. It's a very, very disturbing number. It suggests to me that there may be quotas. I've talked about that and written about it elsewhere, but I think we're getting very close to that point where we're really starting to say there are specific quotas for specific exams. And it's beginning to look and feel like that number is in place, certainly in Florida, maybe some other jurisdictions. If you'd like to talk about your potential bar exam preparation and what state to sit for if you've got a choice, or when to begin your studies, any of those things, I'd like to invite you to contact me. I'd be glad to do a free 20-minute phone consultation with you. We're going to put that link into today's show notes, and there's no obligation. Glad to do it, glad to talk with you, get a sense of where you are, what your schooling, what your background is. Maybe you've been away from the bar for a long time, coming back to take it. Maybe you've got a choice about what state to sit for, maybe you don't. But I'd love to talk with you and kind of help shape these numbers and work with them and explain them a little bit given your particular circumstances. I know it's a lot of numbers to talk about today. I promise not to do that real often, but I do think it's important to look at those numbers. Now, as July 2016 bar results start to come in, which will begin to happen in mid-September and run pretty much up until Thanksgiving, we'll be talking about those results as they come in from state to state and trying to analyze and extrapolate from specific states the bigger trend lines that we see going on. So make sure that you stay with us and follow. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or whatever method you're using to listen. Or you can go to our website at celebrationbarreview.com. There's a link at the top of the page that says podcasts. Go ahead and just click on that. You'll see all of our past episodes and the show notes. And you can also subscribe. There's some links there that let you subscribe through iTunes and some other sources. So I invite you to do that. I think it's going to be a really interesting time coming up over the next couple of months as we get these results in. We see if the results of 2016 play out the same way that the results in 2015 did. And that's my guess as to what's going to happen. Well, thanks for hanging in with me today. Woo! Lots of numbers, but let's hope that the one number that matters, which is your score, is a passing score. And let's make sure that we do all the things that are necessary now to ensure that passing score for you on your next bar exam. Take care. We'll talk to you again next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.